Okay, so I have them here, the key themes, in just like little sound bites and all in different shapes and colors, okay? This representation, the idea here is that these are these big overarching statements, right? Combined, they describe all of the entire field of psychology and like being a psychology major. So this is a learning goal of our class, is to become familiar with these with a couple of examples. It's actually a learning goal for the entire psychology major. So by the end of the 4 years of being a psychology major, you should be able to really be able to expand on each of these themes. Now, they're not explicitly taught in each class. Here's where they're introduced, and I hope that you take them with you and use them if you're a psychology major, and if you're not, I hope you do too. But I put them in different shapes and boxes because you can think of it in a couple different ways. And one way that I like to think about it is it's sort of like a different lens. It's like a different lens that you put on to kind of think about concepts. And that'll come more clear to understand how I mean that. But like, for example, one thing we know about young children is that they all develop at different rates, okay? We also know that most children are going to be walking somewhere, like learning to walk from, not walking to walking, somewhere around the age of 1, right? 12 months, okay? We also know that some will start walking at the age of 6 months and other ones will not start walking until the age of 18 months, okay? If we're talking about that in terms of child development and exceptions and like, okay, well, I've got somebody who didn't walk till 16 months. Is there something wrong with this child? No, there's nothing wrong with this child. It's within the range of expected development, right? That would be, we're looking at the individual differences theme. We're kind of looking at how people don't necessarily, if we have a statement, like general principle, which is most kids usually walk around the age 12 months, but not all, okay? So that's that lens that we're talking about. There might be another time that we're talking about child development, and we're talking about how the brain develops and how many neurons are being created and connected in the early parts of life, and how motor neurons have to be developed in order to learn how to move in the world, and how all the experiences that a child engages in and is aware of and is able to do, and then that strength and that muscle leads to being able to walk. Now, that one we're talking about through the biopsychosocial theme, okay? So we're still talking about the same concept, but we're talking about it through a different lens, okay? So when we talk about things in here, sometimes you'd be like, oh, it goes in that one. Oh, it goes in that one. Sometimes it's categorizing, right? And sometimes it can go in more than one if we put it on as a different lens, okay? So here's another way of categorizing psychology. It's not with the themes, okay? This is how your psychology book, your textbook, the ebook, the Flat World one, that I have in blue all the way through Canvas. If you haven't noticed, if you're a color person and you can see color well, and color is meaningful to you, you can see some of those clues I put in there. You can figure them out if you're not a color person. But the textbook in Canvas is all the blue, okay? And the textbook is organized more by domain, which is a very traditional way of organizing our field, okay? So things like cognitive psychology, neuroscience, development, personality, social interaction. So we have these different areas, and even in the psychology department at Mason, we have applied developmental psychology. So you can get your PhD in applied developmental psychology. You can do a concentration in your psychology major in developmental psychology, applied developmental psychology. You can do a minor, I don't know, can you do a minor in, I'm not sure. But you might be able to do a psychology minor with a concentration in applied developmental psychology, right? In forensic psychology, you can do a forensic psychology minor. You can do, so there's all these different areas of psychology. They're sort of like areas of focus, right? And so that's another way of organizing psychology. So the themes are one way, sort of in buckets like that, or different lenses. And then there's this way. In this way, there are kind of false walls. So when we're talking about child development, we're also very often talking about neuroscience. We're also definitely talking about social interaction. And we're also talking about personality. And we're also talking about cognitive development, learning to learn. And we're also relying on research, ethical research, and all of these applications as well in some way, okay? More likely the clinical one. So for the way that I like to think about the field, this is very useful for learning about very specific concepts. But those themes are really what bring it to life, okay? And if this is the first time you're hearing these things, don't worry. It is in your textbook also, and we continue throughout, okay? So just the idea that there are all these different areas. All right, now, and sometimes you'll see them in all different orders. That's why you didn't see things in the same order, and they're in the beginning, but we mix up the themes because different people do them in different ways. All right, so very briefly, I'm going to go through each one. Psychological, biological, social, and cultural factors influence mental processes and behaviors. So this is where, if we want to say, why did that person act that way? Why were they just so angry? I didn't do anything, right? And you're just like, how do I explain their behavior, okay? And you could explain it by saying, well, they're just an angry person. They're just like that. They just hate people. They're like that. They just interact with the whole world that way, right? And that would be one explanation. We talked about the handwriting misconception, that some people think that you can tell your personality by your handwriting, okay? So if you tell your personality by your handwriting, if you try to, right? If you try to measure it that way, that it's kind of like that explanation of they're just an angry person, right? It's just who they are. It's very incomplete. It's fine to do that if you want to do that. If you're just like, I don't want to be around them, they're just always so angry. There's nothing wrong with doing that, right? But it is an incomplete explanation. You do need to consider, if you really want to understand why, you have to go further. And what you need to consider, so that would be like a personality explanation, because they're like that all the time. You could say, well, how'd they get that way? Because kids don't get born angry, right? You could say, what's going on in their brain? Do they have some sort of trauma reaction, right? Do they just feel like the world's out to get them all the time? Is it their nervous system just reacting and they can't really do much about it because they haven't gone for treatment yet? Are there social and cultural factors involved there with their interactions? What has been their experience with other people? Is there reason for them to feel like the world's out to get them and they're angry all the time, right? Have they gotten their way by being angry? Have they been rewarded for being angry in the past, right? So lots of different considerations, and that's what this one is about. Okay. Next one. All right. Psychological science relies on empirical evidence and adapts as new data develop. So psychology is a science. It's not a science in the way that many of us traditionally think of science, right? Like gravity, test tubes. But we do study a whole lot of things that are related to those things, right? Like MRI scans, other sorts of scans of the brain. So we do have that biology piece of it that seems more sciencey, but it's also research, and the research part using the scientific method. And so we learn about people through the scientific method, which is a methodical, a patterned way of testing hypotheses, right? And then we get information, and then we make some conclusions or some statements about the way people are, or children walk at 12 months. But then we want to continue on and keep studying it, and we might find out more, and we might need to change our conclusions. Perfect example was the COVID pandemic. We did not know enough. This is the way science works. First it was like, okay, well, this is what we think we know, so we're going to do this. And then we learn more, so now we have to do this. And that was really, really hard when it comes to science communication because we were in a crisis and we were trying to solve it very quickly. But science takes time. But same thing happens in psychology. There were some psychological findings that we thought were true that we've had to continually adapt. We talked about the tongue map. We talked about learning styles. Learning styles was never really a psychological finding, but it was something that people believe, and we have more and more evidence that there really is no evidence for that because research, you have to adapt. So whatever conclusions you have need to be open to adaptation, and that is what this theme is about. We already talked about ethical principles a bit more, but we do have ethical guidelines, and like practitioners have an actual code, and just like any other profession, if you violate that code, then you get in trouble, you lose your license, etc. But it's more than that, and we have protections for research subjects, and we're going to learn and hear about animal research, and we have protections for animal research as well, protections for animals. And part of that came out because we didn't always have it, and things went badly. In the readings that you'll do about ethics and research, you'll find out more about what has happened there. Psychology explains general principles that govern behavior while recognizing individual differences. So this is the one where I gave you the example of the toddler learning to walk at different ages, right? So we have general principles, and we can say, people are generally like this, they don't usually help if they are in a group, right? It's less likely that people are going to help if they're in a group than if they are by themselves. That's one of the things we talked about Tuesday. That's a general principle about people. It's not always true. It doesn't always hold in every single situation. But we can say a lot about people based on what we have learned about people. I can tell you, and I will tell you on Tuesday, a whole lot about how to learn and how our memory works, okay? Every research finding that says this is an effective study practice is not going to work for everybody. And that might be partly because maybe you're not doing it the same way that was studied, that said it was effective, or it might be that your brain is different than the people that were studied, right? So, and that's okay. One of the things that I tell you is probably going to help you out. One of the things, all right? So that's individual differences. Next one is our perceptions and biases filter our experience of the world through an imperfect personal lens. I especially like this one because it just captures that, the human condition of we bring to every situation our past experiences and our past learning. So when I see that angry person and I call them angry, I think that they're angry, it's based on knowledge of how people act when they're angry, right? You always bring your prior knowledge, but we also bring our biases and our lenses because maybe I'm in a place where, maybe that angry person that I'm calling an angry person, maybe we're from different cultures. Maybe the behavior that they are displaying isn't actually anger. Maybe it's confidence. Maybe it's fear. Maybe it's something else, but I'm reading it as if it's anger because I have a bias towards the way I have experienced anger before. Okay? So when I say bias, that's what I mean. We have thinking biases that we all have. We just have general biases that happen that based on decision making and things like that and how we sort of experience the world. And we also have our personal experiences that bias how we think about our future experiences. And that's what this one's all about. And it's imperfect, right? My experience is imperfect. It is not the same as your experience, and my lens is imperfect. because I can't possibly have experienced everything you've experienced. I'm almost done, don't worry, there's only 7, right? So applying psychological principles can change our lives, organizations, and communities in positive ways. So this is all of the ways that we can find ways that how we know about, what we know about people can help people, okay? We learn about psychology in the workplace and how teams can work more effectively together. We learn about clinical psychology and treatment. We learn about how to learn. We learn about psychology in the prison system and how we understand the state of mind of a person when they commit a crime. And we understand decision making. We learn about decision making, how we make decisions and how we can make better decisions, right? So applying psychological principles. This is sort of like, a lot of people take this one as sort of like, this is it, this is everything, because it sort of, okay, there we go. Did I skip one? Oh, yep, I did. Okay, psychology values diversity. This is the last one. Values diversity, promotes equity, and fosters inclusion in pursuit of a more just society. So this is one that came out of sort of the history of our field and kind of the history of mankind in general, which is humankind, which is, we haven't always been fair to each other, right? There tends to have been a dominant culture who took advantage of others, right? And that happened in our field, and you'll read about some of those things. And you'll read about what we're doing now in the field of psychology to try to level the playing field a little bit in terms of making sure that everybody who is capable and works hard can succeed in our field. You'll also learn about how we study diversity. Okay, we study all the differences of people and how we can better understand, somebody who identifies with a group that wasn't traditionally studied in our research studies, so we don't really know a lot about that identity, right? And I'm talking in very vague terms because giving those examples right now at the very end of class can be difficult to kind of get into without wrapping it up well. But we'll talk about a lot of different things in here about diversity and inclusion. So